Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. In the days that followed the fall of Barad-dûr, when the skies above Gondor were still streaked with ash and the air bore the scent of scorched earth and broken stone, there came a silence so deep it seemed the very breath of the world had paused. From the White City, still marbled with the scars of battle, a new star began to rise. Not in the heavens, but in the hearts of those who remained. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the long-hidden heir of Isildur, walked now not as a ranger in the wild, but Elessar, king of the reunited realm. His brow bore the weight of a silver crown, his hands still calloused from sword and soil. Though the ring was destroyed and the shadow vanquished, he knew well that the true work of kingship had only just begun. Minas Tirith stirred with a cautious hope. The white tree, once barren, had been found renewed upon the slopes of Mindalawan, and its first blossoms shone pale and fragrant in the spring air, symbols of an ancient promise remembered. From the citadel's high balconies, where once the steward had withered beneath the shadow of despair, the king now looked upon his people with a gaze full of sorrow and grace, for Aragorn had seen too much to forget the cost of peace. On the night of his coronation, when the stars gathered like a silent choir above the city's spires, the wind whispered through the marble colonnades, and the torches flared with a golden fire. Elves from Rivendell and Lothlorien stood beside dwarves from Erebor and men of Gondor and Rohan. Never before had such unity been seen beneath the banner of the White Tree. Yet even in that hour of triumph, Aragorn's heart was not entirely at ease. After the feasting, after the songs of old and the clinking of silver goblets, he withdrew to the tower's highest chamber, a place he had claimed not as a throne room, but as a sanctuary of thought. There he stood alone beneath an open archway, the wind tangling softly in his dark hair, eyes cast northward beyond the Anduin, beyond the Efflu lands that still lay under silence. "There is healing to be done," he murmured, his voice barely above the hush of the breeze. "The war has ended, but the wounds remain." A light touch stirred the air behind him. It was Arwen, clad in midnight blue, her presence a melody that soothed even the most restless thoughts. Her eyes, ageless and deep, carried both joy and sorrow. The joy of choosing a mortal life for love, and the sorrow of the fading world she had left behind. "You do not rest," she said gently, stepping beside him. "I cannot," he replied, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "This crown is not a prize won in battle. It is a burden, and I must carry it with care." Arwen took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "You are not alone, Elessar. The strength that brought you through the fire will guide you in peace. But you must let yourself believe that peace is not only a dream." Below them, the city breathed in soft slumber. Lanterns glowed in the windows of homes being rebuilt. Songs drifted faintly from taverns where laughter had returned. Yet in the king's heart, an unease remained, like the echo of a bell long silent. That night he dreamed of the northern wilds. In his vision, he walked among the broken ruins of Amidst, the ancient city of the kings of Arnor, its white stones drowned in ivy and mist. The wind carried a voice, faint, sorrowful, calling his name not in joy, but in warning. Aragorn. He turned, but saw no one. The mists parted, and before him rose a figure clad in the garb of a forgotten age, tall, cloaked in silver and shadow, bearing a staff of yew. The figure's eyes were veiled, yet Aragorn felt them pierce his soul. "You wear the crown," the figure said, "but the land has not yet healed. Old blood seeps from the earth. Forgotten oaths stir in their sleep. Do not mistake silence for peace." And then the dream unraveled like smoke upon wind, leaving Aragorn awake in the darkness, breath caught in his throat, the name of his fathers echoing in his heart. At dawn he summoned Gandalf. The wizard, now clad in robes of white and light, met him in the king's private garden, where the white tree stood silent beneath the early sun. The fragrance of its blossoms mingled with the scent of damp stone and waking earth. "You are troubled," Gandalf said without preamble. Aragorn nodded, his expression grave. "There are shadows still, Gandalf. The lands beyond the Anduin, the ruins of Arnor. I feel them call to me." "The world does not change in a moment," the wizard replied softly. "Victory is not the end of toil. It is the beginning. Peace must be nurtured like a fragile flame. And in the dark corners, remnants of Sauron's malice may still linger, looking for new hosts, new masters." "Then I must go," Aragorn said, "not as king in majesty, but as a ranger once more. I must see with my own eyes the wounds the war has left behind." Gandalf placed a hand upon his shoulder. "If you go, go not in sorrow, but in hope. Take with you those who understand not only the sword, but the heart. This realm shall not be ruled by power alone." And so the journey began anew, not of conquest, but of restoration. In the days that followed, messengers rode from the White City to the northern realms. The halls of Rivendell were stirred with news, and in the woods of Atheon, Prince Famir prepared new maps. Legolas, still drawn to the sea's whisper, but loyal to his friend, set aside his longing. Gimli, ever proud, polished his axe once more, not for war, but for rebuilding. They would ride again, not to face the wrath of a dark lord, but to confront the quiet trials of peace. And thus the Fourth Age began, not with thunder, but with the slow, deliberate breath of a world reborn. The morning sun, soft and golden, unfurled its rays across the rooftops of Minster, like a gentle hand brushing sleep from the face of the world. Light trickled through the marble colonnades and caught upon the dew-slick stones of the upper courts, where ivy had begun to reclaim corners of the city abandoned during the siege. The air was still touched with the cool breath of early spring, and every scent seemed to carry the memory of yesterday's rain. Wet earth, ash softened by time, and the faint perfume of mountain flowers that had begun to bloom in the higher meadows. The city breathed again, not with triumph, but with a quiet, tentative hope. As though it had not yet dared to believe that peace would remain, Aragorn stood beside the white tree, his fingertips brushing the bark with the reverence one might give to something half-dreamed, half-feared. The branches had begun to shimmer with pale green leaves, so fragile they quivered with each passing gust, like thoughts half-formed in a weary mind. Beneath that sacred canopy, Aragorn felt not only the weight of lineage, but the nearness of memory of all the kings who had come before him, who had ruled, faltered, or vanished into the dust of forgotten song. The crown upon his brow felt less a symbol of victory than a question he had not yet answered. He turned at the sound of approaching footsteps, slow and measured upon the stone. Arwen entered the garden, as if the morning had been waiting for her arrival to begin. The long veil of her hair caught the rising light like the silk of a starlit river, and her eyes, deep pools of twilight from a realm untouched by decay, met his with a sorrow that had become as familiar as love. She said nothing at first, only drew close, placing her hand lightly upon his chest, where his heart beat slow and heavy like the echo of distant drums. "I dreamed again," Aragorn murmured, his voice low, as if speaking aloud might disturb the hush that had settled over the world. "A city with no name, a tower crumbling into the sea. I walked its halls as a stranger, though I knew them as one knows the faces of the dead." Arwen tilted her head, the corners of her mouth barely lifting in that expression of patient melancholy she wore, often now, a smile, forged not of joy, but of understanding. "The past walks beside you," she said, "as it must. You have taken the throne, not only of Gondor, but of memory itself. The stones of this land remember more than songs can tell." Aragorn closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of her touch ground him in the present. "And yet," he whispered, "I fear I do not know what kind of king I must become. To rule in peace is unlike war. In war, the path is lit by fire and sharpened steel. In peace, the road disappears beneath the grass, and we must find our way by the trembling of leaves, the silence of stones." Arwen's hand moved from his chest to cradle his face, her voice softer than the wind that stirred the blossoms. "You are not the sum of your fears, Estel, nor are you bound to the shadows of your forebears. The days ahead will be shaped not by the might of your sword, but by the strength of your mercy, your ability to listen when no voice is raised, to see where no light shines. These are the virtues of a just king." He drew her close, and for a while they said, "No more. Only listen to the city below." The distant clatter of hooves upon cobblestone, the echo of hammers as masons repaired walls, the occasional burst of laughter from the market square, where children played between the stalls. It was a soundscape of a world healing, and it stirred something fragile in Aragorn's heart. Not certainty, but the first breath of it. Later that day, Gandalf joined him in the tower's high chamber, the one that looked eastward across the Pelennor and into the distant, war-scarred lands beyond. The wizard's white robes shimmered faintly in the shifting light, as though they reflected not the sun, but the memory of some brighter, ancient day. "You have summoned me, my friend," Gandalf said, seating himself upon a stone bench worn smooth by centuries of watching. "And your summons bears the weight of troubled dreams." Aragorn remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked toward the mountains that lined the horizon like the backs of slumbering giants. "Yes," he replied, "dreams and something more. There is a stirring I cannot name, like the wind before a storm that does not break. The lands beyond the Unduin, the forgotten vales of Arnor. I feel them in my blood as though they are speaking to me, not in words, but in ache." Gandalf nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing with a wisdom so deep it seemed older than the towers of Minas. "It is not uncommon for those who have stood so near to the abyss to sense the trembling of the world's forgotten edges. Peace has returned, but it has not yet taken root. The soil of Middle-earth is rich with old griefs, and such wounds do not close swiftly. They seep into the land like slow poison." Aragorn turned to face him, his expression carved from thought and fire. "I wish to see them," he said, "not to conquer, nor to command, but to understand. There are ruins older than my house scattered in the north, towers where the stars shine through broken ceilings, and names carved into stone that no tongue remembers. I must walk those places again, not as a king, but as a man, as Istole, who once wandered the wild and listened to the wind." Gandalf was quiet for a long moment, watching the flicker of torchlight against the window pane. "Such journeys are not without risk," he said at last. "The remnants of Sauron's malice did not vanish with his fall. Shadows have many forms, and they find new vessels easily. Old hatreds, broken oaths, and the hollow places in men's hearts. But if you must go, then you must not go alone." A silence settled again, and in it the city seemed to lean closer, as if Minas Tirith herself were listening. "I will call for Legolas," Aragorn said, "and Gimli, and for Eomer, if he is willing. I do not ask warriors. I ask for friends who understand the weight of silence." "Then you are wiser than many kings before you," Gandalf said, rising with the grace of a man who has climbed mountains not of stone, but of time itself. "And if you will go, I will see to it that the lands are made ready to receive you, not with trumpets and banners, but with the quiet hospitality of those who remember the darkness and are learning once again to trust the light." As the wizard departed, the shadows lengthened in the tower chamber, stretching across the floor like the lines of an ancient map. Paths not yet taken, memories not yet made. Aragorn remained where he was, the crown upon his brow, and a new resolve forming in the forge of his heart. He did not yet know where the journey would lead him, but he felt its necessity as one feels the pull of tide or the inevitability of dawn. Peace, he knew, was not the end of a tale. It was the land in which new stories began, quietly, carefully, like seeds in soil once scorched by fire. And so the king prepared to walk again, not to rule, but to remember, not to build empires, but to bind the broken threads of a world newly born. The days that followed were steeped in a kind of sacred stillness, as if time itself had slowed its passage in reverence for the momentous decisions being quietly shaped beneath the high towers of Minster. The White City, ever watchful and eternal upon its mountain throne, remained draped in the cloak of early spring, a season not yet in full bloom, but carrying within it the promise of green awakening. Pale blossoms had begun to peek from the cracks in stone courtyards, delicate offerings from nature to the world of men, and the scent of lavender and juniper drifted on the morning breeze that whispered down from the snowy peaks of Mindalluin. In this atmosphere, half suspended between past and future, Aragorn moved like a man between dreams, his footsteps slow, deliberate, as though he were afraid that the simple act of walking might shatter the fragile silence. Peace had only just begun to weave. He stood often at the balcony that overlooked the Pelennor fields, the lands now golden with rebirth, where once the clash of swords had rung like thunder and the cries of the dying had drowned the wind. From here the road to Asgalath shimmered like a river of memory, and beyond it the dark line of the Efl-Duath loomed still, no longer pulsing with malice, but forever carved with the shape of ancient dread. He looked not with fear, but with contemplation, as one might regard a scar on the body, not with revulsion, but with solemn remembrance of the pain that birthed it. It was in these moments when the sun spilled across the fields and cast long shadows from the broken stones of siege towers now crumbled into relics, that Aragorn felt the true weight of the crown he bore, not as gold upon his brow, but as time etched into his soul. It was on such a morning that he summoned Famir to his private chambers. Famir, Prince of Atheon, the steward's son, who bore the dignity of old Numor in every quiet gesture, whose eyes seemed always to seek meaning beyond the moment, and whose heart, tempered by fire and solitude, had become a mirror in which Aragorn often glimpsed his own inner doubts. Famir entered with the humility of one who understood that power was not a mantle, but a burden shared in silence. He bowed not with ceremony, but with the grace of one friend acknowledging the sorrow of another. "My lord," he said, his voice like parchment brushed by wind, "you sent for me." Aragorn gestured toward the balcony, where the sun now painted the sky in molten hues of amber and pearl. "Yes, Famir, come. There is something I must speak, and I would have it heard not by a prince, nor by a steward's heir, but by a man who has stood in shadow and chosen light, not because it promised triumph, but because it was right." Famir joined him, his gaze following the curve of the land as it stretched toward the east. The breeze caught his dark hair, lifting it gently, and for a long while they both stood without speaking, as if their thoughts needed space to unfurl like sails before they could find the wind. At last Aragorn broke the silence. "Do you ever feel, Famir, that peace is not a gift we have received, but a question we have yet to answer? That we stand not upon a shore of arrival, but at the edge of an unknown sea, and the boat we are asked to sail is one we must build from the wreckage of war?" Famir turned to him slowly, his eyes thoughtful, their gray depths catching the light like water beneath starlight. "I do," he said, "and often. Peace, in truth, demands more from us than war. In war we are called to resist, to endure. But in peace we are asked to forgive, to restore, to remember without vengeance, and to rebuild, not in our own image, but in the image of hope. And hope is a fragile stone to lay as a foundation." Aragorn sighed, the sound full of a weariness that came not from the body, but from the soul's long wandering. "Then you understand I am not afraid of battle, but I find myself afraid of silence, of the voices that may yet rise in it. There are still ruins in the north, in the lands where once Arnor stood, names that live only in dust, stories that end with ellipses, not resolutions. I must go there, Famir, not as a king, perhaps not even as a healer, but as a son of that fading line, to sit among the ghosts of my kindred and ask them, 'What now?'" Famir's hand rested lightly upon the stone ledge. "Then go," he said, "but do not go alone. Take with you those who understand the shape of your heart. The lands you speak of are not barren, they are dreaming. And dreams, my lord, are not silent. They are merely waiting for someone who knows how to listen." Aragorn looked at him then with deep gratitude, a warmth stirring in the hollow places of his chest. "You speak with the wisdom of old trees," he said, "steady, rooted in sorrow, yet reaching always for the sun." Famir smiled faintly, a gesture as fleeting as a breeze upon still water. "Then let the roots guide you," he said, "and may your journey be not only one of remembrance, but of return." As the Prince of Athelion departed, his cloak trailing like dusk behind him, Aragorn felt the world tilt slightly toward decision. That evening, beneath the rising moon, an argent lantern drifting through clouds like a memory afloat. He sent word to Legolas and Gimli, who had not yet departed for their distant realms. Messengers rode swift and silent into the night, their cloaks flashing like shadows between lanterns, their voices low with the urgency of dreams being summoned. And when the night deepened, when even the wind seemed to hush in reverence, Aragorn sat alone in the Hall of Kings. The high-vated ceiling loomed above him like the arc of time itself, and the statues of his ancestors watched in silence, their stony eyes hollowed by centuries of waiting. He placed Andorol before him, not as a weapon, but as a relic, a shard of history reforged, and whispered to the sword the thoughts he could not yet shape into speech. "To lead is not to command," he murmured, his voice barely louder than the breath of the torches. "It is to walk into the dark and carry the flame, even when your own hands tremble. I do not know what lies in the lands of Arnor, but I know they call to me, and I will answer." The sword did not answer, but the firelight caught upon its blade, and in that reflection, Aragorn thought he glimpsed not his own face, but the shadow of a road winding northward into mist and memory. And somewhere, far beyond the walls of the White City, the wind shifted direction, as if stirred by an unseen thought, and carried with it the scent of pine and rain, and the faintest echo of a song once sung in the halls of forgotten kings. The morning Aragorn set forth was veiled in a mist that clung to the stones of Minas Tirith like the fading breath of dreams, not yet dispelled by the waking world. The city stirred gently in the pale hush, its towers and rooftops softened by the gauze of dew and low cloud, as though the very walls of stone, steeped in centuries of battle and silence, had conspired to offer him one final moment of stillness before the turning of the path. The white tree stood solemn in the king's court, its tender green leaves trembling with an unseen breeze, whispering secrets only the attentive might hear, as if the soul of the land itself had risen into its branches to watch him go. The roads were quiet, not with fear, but with reverence. Messengers had spread word through the city that the king was riding north, not in grandeur, not in glory, but with a silence heavy with meaning. Those who watched him depart, craftsmen, soldiers, weavers, and children, did not cheer nor weep. They merely stood in doorways and windows, some with hands pressed over hearts, others with brows furrowed in thought, as if each soul understood in some quiet part of their being that this journey was not of state or duty, but of the deeper sort, one undertaken by men who carried the weight of many worlds within them. Aragorn wore no cloak of state, only a travel-stained mantle of gray, the sword worn by the Dunedain of old. Upon his brow he bore not the silver crown of the reunited realm, but a simple circlet of star-rod steel, light and unadorned. And at his side hung Andoril, its hilt bound in leather darkened by use and memory. The sword did not gleam, but it seemed to pulse gently in the gloom, like a shard of day hidden in twilight. Legolas came to his side in silence, the elf's footsteps as soundless as light falling on still water. He was clad in the hues of the forest, green and brown, interwoven like leaf and bark. And though his gaze was as keen and unclouded as it had ever been, there was a new stillness in it, a gentling, as if the long shadows of sorrow had finally taught him the beauty of pausing. "It is strange," Legolas said as they rode beyond the last gate, his voice a soft thread in the mist, "how the world continues to breathe even after it has bled. I expected the lands to be broken, hollowed by grief, but instead they seemed to exhale slowly, uncertainly, as though waking from a long illness and learning again how to dream. Aragorn turned his head slightly, nodding. "Grief does not always burn as fire," he said. "Sometimes it settles like moss, creeping into every crevice of the soul, softening, muffling, making everything quieter, but no less haunted." This land is not free of sorrow. It simply wears it differently now. Behind them, the stone walls of Minas Tirith faded into the rising fog, and Gimli rode forward, his beard tucked into his cloak to guard against the chill. His brow was furrowed, not in displeasure, but in the kind of contemplation that only dwarves seem to carry easily. A rumination born of stone, deep thought, and generations of memory passed from beard to beard. "You speak of sorrow like a thing alive," he grumbled gently, more to the mist than to them. "And maybe it is. I've seen it grow roots in halls where laughter once rang like hammers on anvils. But I wonder, do men always carry it so near to the surface? In my halls, we lock it away in stone. We carve our grief into runes and hide it in the bones of the mountain. We do not speak it aloud. Yet here you are speaking of dreams and moss and breath. It is unsettling and strangely comforting." Aragorn smiled faintly, though his eyes did not lose their distant sheen. "Perhaps we speak it aloud because it never truly leaves us. We are too short-lived to forget. Each sorrow is carried like a child, grown, cradled, mourned, and passed on. And this journey, Gimli, is not just to see the world that was. It is to meet the grief that shaped it, to look upon it, not with fear, but with understanding." They rode on for many days through lands that bore the wear of war and quiet scars. Fields that had once been battlegrounds now grew soft with wildflowers, their roots fed by blood too ancient to name. Trees leaned together as if whispering, and rivers ran a little clearer, a little slower, like the veins of a world recovering from fever. Birds sang hesitantly in branches not yet certain of spring, and the sun broke through the cloud only in glances, shy and golden. When at last they came to the edge of the northern wilds, to where the land grew quiet in a different way, not with healing, but with abandonment, they dismounted and walked for a time, letting the silence guide them. Here the ruins of Arnor began to rise from the hills, like forgotten thoughts surfacing from an old mind. Broken towers wreathed in ivy, walls slumped into mossy earth, roads choked by root and time. It was at one such ruin, an archway half collapsed beneath which a stream trickled like an old voice humming a lullaby, that Aragorn stopped and knelt. He placed his hand upon a stone engraved with worn letters, their meaning lost to all but the most ancient tongues. "This was a hall of council once," he said, his voice filled with a gentleness that surprised even him. "Here the kings of old spoke not of battle, but of wisdom, of justice, of what it meant to be both ruler and servant. And now it lies open to the sky, and the stars are its only witnesses." Legolas sat upon a fallen beam, his fingers tracing the bark of a sapling that had taken root in the stones. "Perhaps that is fitting," he mused. "For what is a king, if not one who must learn to rule beneath the eyes of eternity?" Aragorn looked up at the sky, gray and endless, its clouds like thoughts drifting in a mind too vast for understanding. "It is easy to rule when the enemy is clear," he said. "But in peace, every decision is a stone cast into a still lake. The ripples spread unseen, sometimes for generations. What I do here now may shape children I will never meet. That is a fear greater than any blade." Gimli laid a hand on his shoulder. "Then let it also be your hope. He said that your stones fall true, that the ripples carry strength, and that when the lakes settle again, the reflection they hold is one of light." And there, in the silence of forgotten kings, beneath a sky that neither judged nor forgave, only endured, they rested, not from weariness of body, but from the long ache of unspoken questions. And the wind passed softly through the stones. As if in answer, the days grew longer as they journeyed deeper into the lands where the name of Arnor lingered like a fading whisper in the hollows of valleys and the forgotten bends of rivers. The road, if one could still call it that, had ceased to follow any formal path, and instead wound through thicket of golden gore and heather, over weathered hillocks, where the stones stood like old bones exposed by wind and rain, and into wood so ancient that even Legolas, with his elven memory, could not name every tree. Time itself seemed to thicken in those northern reaches. Every step forward felt not as a measure of distance, but as a descent into the sediment of forgotten years. The land did not resist them, but neither did it welcome them. It simply watched, silent and abiding, with a gaze born not of eyes, but of endurance. There came one dusk to a place that had no name, though once it had surely borne many. There a single tower rose from the crest of a wooded ridge, its stones blackened not by fire, but by the long, slow grief of abandonment. Ivy hung like mourning veils from its cracked parapets. In the last light of the sun spilled across its western face, turning every fracture and scar into veins of gold. Around its base, the forest had begun to reclaim what had been stone, roots curling like fingers through the broken thresholds, saplings sprouting in the forgotten corners of old courtyards, and the wind playing low laments through shattered arrow slits. They made camp in what remained of a great hall, now open to the sky, where the roof had long since fallen. Moss carpeted the flagstones, and rainwater glistened in the grooves of old runes, like tears welling in words too old to be read. A fire was kindled in the ancient hearth, and its glow painted their faces with a flickering warmth that stood in soft defiance against the encroaching chill. As the flames licked the shadows away, the scent of pine resin and distant rain filled the air, mingling with the subtle musk of old stone and leaf litter. Gimli sat close to the fire, absently sharpening his axe, though it had not dulled. The rhythmic grasp of stone on steel was less a necessity and more a meditation, a habit that grounded him in a world where so much had shifted. His eyes, ever watchful, roamed the corners of the ruin, noting the decay, not as a mason might judge imperfection, but as a keeper of history might behold the erosion of meaning. Finally he spoke, not abruptly, but with the deliberate care of someone shaping each word like a piece of stone to fit its rightful place. "There is a melancholy in these stones," he said, his voice low and rough, yet softened by reflection, not of defeat, but of waiting, as though the place itself has been holding its breath for 1,000 years, hoping that someone, anyone, might remember its name. Legolas, seated on a beam overgrown with moss, his long fingers folded around his knees, tilted his head toward the dwarf, the firelight catching in his eyes like starlight caught in the stillness of a midnight pool. "Elves know well the burden of long memory," he said. "We do not forget, but sometimes even remembrance becomes a weight. There are places in this world where time gathers like mist, where the past refuses to be past, and where every leaf whispers not of now, but of what once was. This is such a place. And yet memory alone does not restore what was lost. Aragorn listened without speaking for some time, his eyes fixed on the fire, though he did not truly see it. The flames danced in his vision like the ghosts of kings, tall, proud, but transparent, flickering in and out of shape. His hands rested upon his knees, fingers interlaced, and his brow furrowed not with doubt, but with the burden of clarity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and thoughtful, carrying not the weight of command, but the tremble of introspection. "There is a sorrow in this place that mirrors something within me," he said. "Not the sorrow of war, which is sharp and sudden, but the slow sorrow of inheritance, of carrying something too old for the hand that bears it. I feel as though I am walking through the corridors of my own bloodline, and each ruin I pass is another chamber of the heart left unhealed. My line faltered here. Isildur's seed failed to keep watch. We grew scattered, thin as smoke, wandering through ages of shadow and forgetting. And now I return, not with triumph, with questions that have no easy answers." Legolas looked at him then, not as a subject looks to a king, but as one soul regards another who stands at a crossroads of spirit. "And what answer do you seek, Essel?" he asked gently. "What would you hope to find among these fallen stones and haunted roads?" Aragorn was silent for a long moment, then rose to his feet. The firelight fell across his face in uneven patterns, illuminating the hollows beneath his eyes, the wear at the edges of his gaze. He walked slowly to the edge of the ruin, where the wall had crumbled away, revealing a vast swath of forest rolling into darkness. The moon was rising, half veiled by clouds, its light silvering the treetops and casting long shadows into the glades. The wind stirred the leaves, and their rustling seemed to form a language older than words. "I do not seek glory," he said at last, his voice barely above the wind, "nor absolution. I seek understanding. I wish to know how to rule without losing what made me worthy of the crown. I wish to lead without becoming distant from those I serve. I fear, Legolas, that in rebuilding kingdoms, we risk becoming symbols instead of men. And if I am to guide this age, I must remain both. That is why I came north, not to claim, but to remember what humility truly means." Gimli, having paused his sharpening, let out a soft breath, like the settling of dust in an old tunnel. "You speak of memory and humility as though they are burdens," he said. "But perhaps they are your armor. Stone endures because it yields. Even the mountains bow to time, and perhaps so must kings." The fire crackled between them, casting shifting light on their faces and shadows that leaned long across the ruin, like old memories stretching out their limbs. Around them, the forest listened, and the sky above drifted into a deeper hush, as if the stars themselves were drawing nearer to hear the thoughts of men and elves and dwarves. Beings once scattered by fate, now drawn together by the gravity of a world trying to heal. That night, Aragorn did not sleep quickly. He lay upon his cloak, his head resting on his pack, staring up through the open rafters to where the sky unfurled like a tapestry woven in silence and light. The constellations, familiar yet distant, blinked slowly above him, and he found himself wondering if Isildur long ago had gazed at these same stars, asking the same questions, feeling the same ache. And as the wind whispered through the tall grass and the moon crept higher into her throne of silver, Aragorn closed his eyes and let himself drift, not into forgetfulness, but into memory that no longer hurt, only waited like a voice in the dark, saying, "You are not alone." The dawn that followed was not bright, but pale and diffused, as though the sun rising behind thick curtains of drifting cloud was reluctant to cast light upon a world so heavy with memory. A thin mist clung to the underbrush and the worn stones, softening the edges of the ruin where they had rested, blurring the hard outlines of old battlements into ghostly shapes like the fragments of a forgotten dream. Birdsong came slow and hesitant, not in the jubilant chorus of spring's full arrival, but in isolated, thoughtful calls, long, solitary notes echoing through the moss-laced arches and the cracked lintels of doorways that led nowhere. The air itself was cool, imbued with the scent of wet lichen, black soil, and the faded perfume of ferns that clung stubbornly to life among the decay. Aragorn rose early, his steps quiet upon the dew-slick stone, and stood beneath what remained of the tower's shadow, watching the mists drift through the hollows like pale spirits. His cloak was gathered at his shoulders, and the wind tugged gently at its hem, as if the air itself sought to lead him onward. Yet he did not move. He simply stood, listening. There was a sound here beneath the song of the wind and the murmur of unseen streams, a deep, abiding hush, not of lifelessness, but of deep listening. It was a silence that had grown wise through solitude, a silence that expected nothing, yet offered something nonetheless. Gimli joined him a moment later, his boots thudding softly on the damp stone, his breath curling into the morning chill. He stood beside the king without speaking for some time, letting the silence settle between them like the comfortable weight of old armor. Then his voice emerged, rough but not without warmth. "You know," he began, his tone thoughtful, almost musing, "I used to think ruins were just remnants, debris, stones and timber that had failed to hold against time. But the more we walk through these places, the more I start to feel that they remember. Not with minds, not like us, but in some deeper way. The way a mountain remembers its shaping, or the way a tree remembers which way to lean into the sun." Aragorn turned toward him, his gaze not heavy, but sharpened by thought. "Yes," he said, his voice low and steady. "Ruins do not forget. They endure, even when those who raised them are long turned to dust. They hold the shape of the people who built them, the measure of their dreams and their failings. And walking through them, it is like walking through the hollow ribcage of time. You hear your own footsteps echo off ancient bones." Gimli nodded, his expression solemn. "It humbles you, doesn't it? Reminds you that even kings, even dwarves or elves with all their long lives, are no more than moments in the slow breath of the world. And yet," he added, his brow furrowing, "there's something comforting in that too, that we can leave something behind that lasts beyond us, even if it's just stone." Legolas, stepping out from beneath the boughs of a nearby oak, added his voice to theirs, his tone quiet and clear as a bell toll heard through mist. "And yet it is not the stone alone that endures," he said. "Is the intention, the memory behind it. Trees fall, rivers shift, mountains crumble in the deep courses of time. But the spirit that shaped them, the will that built, those linger, woven into the fabric of the land. These ruins, they are not dead things. They are echoes, and echoes are never truly gone. only waiting for ears that remember how to listen. There was a long pause as the three stood together and watched the morning unfold, not in brilliance, but in a slow unveiling, light seeping through the mist like ink into water, revealing more of the forest beyond. Tangled groves where the trunks twisted like the limbs of dancers long stilled. Glades dappled with the soft glow of bluebells, and moss-covered stones that looked almost like faces. Then Aragorn spoke again slowly, the weight of his words balanced carefully, as if they had been waiting their turn to be uttered. "When I was young," he said, "and wandered these lands under the name of Strider, I often thought of the North as empty, a realm abandoned, fallen into shadow, where the wind was the only king. But now I see it was never empty. It was grieving. Quietly, patiently, it was holding its breath, waiting. Not for me, not for anyone in particular, but for the return of meaning." He turned and gestured to the ruins around them, the moss-covered stones, the half-swallowed steps that led nowhere, the remnants of a wall now embraced by ivy in time. "These places do not ask to be restored. They do not demand that their names be spoken again. They simply exist as memory does, as sorrow does, as love does, even when unspoken. And it is not my place to claim them, only to witness them, and perhaps to let them know they are not forgotten." Legolas laid a hand on his friend's shoulder, his gaze soft and eternal. "To remember," he said, "is to honor. And perhaps that is the truest act of kingship, not to rule, but to remember rightly, to carry the old truths forward, even when they weigh like mountains." Aragorn bowed his head, a gesture not of defeat, but of reverence. "Yes," he whispered, "and if I can do that, if I can listen long enough, walk far enough, feel deeply enough, perhaps I can teach others to do the same. Not with decrees, but with example, with silence." The wind rose gently around them, stirring the leaves into soft applause, and a crow passed overhead, its wings cutting the sky with a cry that echoed through the valley like a proclamation. The forest listened, the stones listened, and somewhere beneath the soil, the roots of the past shifted faintly, as if in recognition. That day they did not journey far. They remained among the ruins, walking slowly, speaking little, each of them lost in his own reflections, letting the land tell its story in its own time. Aragorn moved from hall to hall, not with the purpose of a traveler seeking shelter, but like a pilgrim in a temple whose god had no name, only the weight of silence and stone. He paused often before doorways that led to emptiness, before carvings half erased by the wind, before windows that now opened only onto vines and the slow dance of dust motes in the air. And in each place he stood still, eyes half closed, not seeking vision, but listening to the past, to the ghosts, to himself. That night, as the stars emerged, dim at first, then sharper and more numerous, the three companions sat beneath the tower once more, and for a long time none of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, and the shadows it cast seemed gentler, less like warnings, more like memories drawing close to share in the warmth. And somewhere deep within Aragorn, a quiet space began to open, a chamber in the heart, long sealed by duty and fear, where something ancient stirred, not in anger, but in welcome. The next morning rose like a slow exhalation, the horizon painted in hues of quiet ember and faint rose, as if the world itself was stretching gently into wakefulness after dreaming long beneath the canopy of stars. The sky above the wilds of the north was vast and unbroken, a dome of soft gray dupil brushed with wisps of high wandering clouds that drifted like the remnants of some ancient tapestry unraveling at the edge of heaven. The earth below still glistened from the dew of the night, and every blade of grass seemed to hold a single drop of light, trembling, delicate, as though the very ground had been weeping in joy or sorrow. It was hard to tell which, for the land here was saturated with both, braided so tightly together that joy and grief had become one indistinguishable song sung beneath the breath of time. They rode slow through a vale where the hills gathered close like slumbering guardians, their sides covered with heather and young birch whose leaves fluttered like silver coins in the early light. The forest here was gentler, more open, touched by sunlight that filtered down through branches in warm, dappled pools. There was a sweetness in the air, not cloying but subtle and mournful. The scent of wild thyme and distant fires, of bark warmed by sun and stone warmed by memory. Birds flitted through the branches above, some silent, others singing soft notes that seemed not calls, but echoes of forgotten lullabies. It was Aragorn who first halted, drawing his horse to a stop before the ruins of what once must have been a settlement. Small, perhaps, but well loved. Here the stones were not grand towers nor defensive walls, but low foundations traced with the remains of hearths and walls, circles of firestone, broken wells, a small shrine worn nearly to dust. The moss grew thick here, and wildflowers sprang between the stones, violets, forget-me-nots, and the fragile white blossoms of starwort that opened only with the dawn. It was not the grandeur of a lost city that held them now, but something smaller, something gentler, the bones of everyday lives long past, lives not written into song, but which had sung themselves into the land. Aragorn dismounted slowly, and when his boots touched the earth, he did not walk forward with purpose, but with reverence, as though entering a sacred space not marked by ritual, but by memory. His gaze drifted from the remnants of homes to the ancient tree at the heart of the clearing. A great elm, its branches wide and gnarled, its bark twisted with the carvings of names too weathered to read. Beneath it, half buried in earth and moss, stood a stone bench cracked in two, but still bearing the unmistakable shape of a resting place. He placed a hand upon the bark, fingers trailing through the scars and grooves of time. And after a long silence, he spoke softly, not to his companions, but to the tree, to the memory it held. "There is a stillness here," he said, "a kind of peace that no throne could ever command. Not because the pain has vanished, but because it has been held, and held long enough to become something else, something sacred. It is not that these people were great in the way songs remember greatness. They were great because they lived. They grew old. They laughed, they wept, they raised children, and they spoke their names into this land, so that even now, long after their breath has passed into the soil, something of them remains." Legal, who had walked quietly behind, lowered himself to sit upon the other half of the broken bench, his gaze lifted to the trembling leaves of the elm. "Elves do not forget," he said, his voice carrying the stillness of twilight. "But we often forget what it means to remember simply without grandeur. To recall not the battles nor the victories, but the ordinary days, the hum of bees in summer, the way a child's laughter clings to the walls of a home, the scent of bread cooling by the fire. It is those memories that the trees carry best. I think not the great deeds, but the small ones that made a place beloved. Gimli leaned against a stone pillar cracked through with root and rain. His arms crossed, his brow furrowed not in anger, but in reflection. "In the halls beneath the mountain," he said after a pause, "we carve into the stone the names of our fathers, our mothers, our kin. We etch their deeds, their lives, their passing. But what I never understood, not until now, is that the land itself remembers in a different way. It does not carve, it grows. It does not inscribe, but enfolds. And in that enfolding, the dead are not lost. They are carried, not in words, in roots, in wind, in the silence between songs." Aragorn lowered himself to the grass, knees folding gently, his hands resting palm down upon the moss, as if to feel the pulse of the earth. "Then, perhaps," he murmured, eyes half closed, "my journey was not to find what was broken and restore it, but to learn that not all that falls needs raising. Some things are sacred because they fell, because they were allowed to return to the earth and become part of its dreaming." He looked up at them, and his eyes held a different light now, not the fire of a warrior, nor the certainty of a ruler, but the deep, reflective glow of one who has walked to the farthest edge of his lineage and come back not with answers, but with the humility of stillness. "I thought I came here to reclaim the past," he said, "but now I see I came to lay it down, to offer it back to the earth that bore it, and to carry only what will guide me forward, not what would chain me to the weight of names and blood. My ancestors do not ask for a monument. They ask for a future where such monuments are no longer needed." The wind shifted then, moving gently through the leaves, and the sound it made was like the sigh of an old mother watching her children return from afar. The grass bent slightly, and the petals of the starwort opened a little wider in the light. That night they did not build a fire. They let the moonlight warm them instead, and they lay beneath the ancient elm, watching the stars turn slowly overhead like the wheels of memory in the heavens. No one spoke for a long time, and when they did, it was only in whispers, as though unwilling to break the sacred hush that had descended upon them. And in that stillness, something shifted in Aragorn's heart. Not an ending, but a beginning. A threshold crossed, not by choice alone, but by readiness. And he knew, as surely as he had known the touch of Arwen's hand, that when he returned to Gondor, it would not be with the crown heavier upon his brow, but lighter, not because the burden had lessened, but because he had found the strength to carry it with peace. They did not leave the nameless glade quickly, nor with haste pressed upon their spirits. Instead, they lingered in its embrace, as one lingers in the arms of an old friend, silent, unhurried, content to feel rather than speak, to be rather than act. The days moved gently around them, the passage of time no longer marked by duty or schedule, but by the slow turning of light upon leaves, by the shift in the tone of the birdsong, by the cooling breath of twilight when the mists returned like silver veils drawn across the bones of the world. The land itself seemed unwilling to let them go, and they, each, in their own silent understanding, yielded to that reluctance. There are places in the world where the heart of things grows tender, where silence speaks and stones remember. And this, they knew now, was one such place. On the third day of stillness, Aragorn sat beneath the elm as dusk unfurled, leaning against its trunk, his legs stretched before him, and his fingers lazily tracing the patterns in the bark. Those old, worn runes of names long since returned to the earth. His eyes were open but unfocused, cast toward the horizon where the sky melted into molten gold and ashery cloud. And his face bore that quiet expression only those who have wept deeply and now understand silence as a friend can wear. Legolas sat nearby, cross-legged upon a low stone, worn smooth by the weight of forgotten years. His gaze drifted upward through the canopy, watching how the last of the light caught in the trembling leaves, how the shadows moved through the branches like old thoughts stirring after long sleep. He spoke not immediately, but when he did, his voice was slow and thoughtful, the kind of speech that carries the rhythm of old music, not for performance, but for communion. "Do you think?" he asked, his tone barely louder than the rustle of the trees. "That memory itself is a kind of forest. That each life leaves behind not only deeds and words, but roots. Roots that stretch beyond our knowing, through earth and time, touching other roots, interweaving. That perhaps there is a secret wood beneath the soil of the world, unseen but ever-growing, where all who have loved and lost and hoped are connected, where every grief becomes nourishment for future joy, and every joy deepens the soil for understanding." Aragorn turned his head slowly, regarding his friend with that quiet, steady gaze that had once quelled fear on battlefields, but now seemed turned inward, as if listening more to his own soul than to the words alone. "Yes," he said at last, "I have come to believe something like that. That nothing truly ends. That the people we lose, the choices we make, the pains we carry, they do not vanish into void, but settle into the roots of things. And perhaps that is what we mean when we speak of legacy. Not pride, not renown, but this quiet interweaving. To live not above the earth, but within it. To be remembered not in song, but in the tilt of a tree towards sunlight, in the peace that lingers in a glade long after the voices are gone." Gimli, who had been quiet for most of the day, now stood a little apart, his back to a low wall blanketed in moss, his arms folded across his chest, and his gaze turned not to the sky, but to the ground. He had always found his truth in the stone and in the soil, in that which endures not by resisting the wind, but by becoming part of it. When he spoke, it was with the cadence of stone shaping itself through time, measured, considered, and full of weight. "I used to think that legacy was a kind of armor," he said. "A shell we built around ourselves to keep the world from forgetting what we did. But here in this place, I begin to wonder if it is not armor at all, but a kind of soil, not a defense, but a gift. Something we offer to the world, to be taken in, used, remade. Perhaps it is enough not to be remembered in our own names, but to be the ground upon which others find their footing." A quiet descended after his words, not heavy, but deep, like the hush that falls in the heart of a mountain when all the forges have grown cold and only the memory of fire remains. The wind stirred again through the leaves, and in it there was a scent of change, pine warmed by sun, distant rivers moving under stone, the faintest trace of smoke from some far village preparing for evening. It was not the smell of endings, it was the smell of departure. The next morning, Aragorn rose with the sun. He did not say he was ready. He did not need to. The shift in his step, the way he gathered his cloak, The gentleness with which he laid a hand upon the old elm's trunk and whispered something inaudible, all spoke of a man who had found what he came seeking, though it bore no form he could name. His face was different now, not changed in feature, but in depth. There was something older in his eyes, and something younger, too. The light of understanding kindled from sorrow, and the quiet strength of one who no longer feared his own uncertainty. They did not ride fast as they turned south back toward the long road that would lead them once more to the halls of men. But they rode with purpose, not of urgency, but of meaning. The landscape unfolded before them, more vibrant than before. Hills like the sleeping backs of dragons veiled in heather and cloud. Forests echoing with the calls of unseen birds. Brooks glimmering with fish no longer disturbed by war. Even the air seemed brighter, not in light alone, but in spirit, as though the world had been holding its breath and now exhaled softly in their passing. Aragorn said little on the road, but his silence was no longer burdened. It was the silence of a man in dialogue with the world itself, listening to each gust of wind, each distant echo of thunder, each broken stone half swallowed by ivy, and hearing in them not noise, but conversation. When he did speak, it was to observe the small things, the way the sun broke through a tree in 5 beams instead of 4, the pattern of deer tracks near a stream, the soft sigh of grass as they passed through it. It was as though he had learned the language of stillness, and now everything around him spoke. One night, as they camped beside a river whose name none of them knew, Aragorn sat gazing into the fire and said more to himself than to the others. "I thought a king had to be a shepherd, always guiding, always guarding. But perhaps a king must also learn to be a tree, rooted, listening, letting others find shelter in his branches, not by commanding, but by being still enough to grow." Legal stirred the fire with a branch, his eyes reflecting the flames like twin moons. "And when the wind comes, will you bend?" he asked gently. Aragorn smiled a slow, soft thing. "I will try," he said, "and if I break, may I fall in such a way that I nourish what grows after." They said nothing more that night. They needed nothing more. And above them the stars turned silently as they always had and always would. Witnesses not to greatness, but to becoming. The journey homeward unfolded like the last pages of a well-worn book, not rushed, nor overly ceremonious, but paced with the weight of understanding. Each mile a footnote, each sunrise a quiet punctuation to what had come before. The road was no longer simply a path to be trodden. It had become a narrative written in the rhythm of hoofbeats, in the sighing of trees, in the whisper of wind across empty fields where once banners had flown and blood had soaked the soil. The land itself seemed to sense the change in those who moved across its skin. The grass no longer merely bent beneath their tread, but appeared to lean in, listening, as if drawn to the echo of something new growing in the soul of its king. The southern sky grew warmer as they drew nearer to Gondor, though the air still bore the chill memory of the north. Wild flowers reappeared along the verges, yellow celandine and purple colleen, clover and yarrow, and the bright blue kisses of harebell, all trembling in the breeze like thoughts left unsaid. Small villages appeared more frequently now. Stone houses with moss-covered roofs, smoke curling from chimneys and lazy spirals. Children laughing in fields that once trembled beneath the feet of war. At each place the people gathered quietly, drawn not by heralds or fanfare, but by something older, something instinctive, a stirring in the heart that told them the wind had changed. When they finally reached the outlying hills of Minas, it was not with horns and banners, but in the soft light of a late afternoon, where the sun lay like molten gold upon the flanks of the white mountains, and the shadows of the towers reached out across the fields like arms welcoming something long lost. The city stood tall, unchanged in stone, but somehow different in spirit, as though it too had exhaled, had watched the return of its king, not from the battlements, but from the hidden quiet of its gardens and libraries and long-forgotten halls, and knew in the marrow of its stone that something had deepened. Aragorn paused before entering. He stood on a low rise where the road dipped toward the gates and looked out over the fields of Pelennor, now green and blooming with the stubborn beauty of a land refusing to let memories sour into sorrow. Here the ghosts of war still walked, not to haunt, but to remind. The cannons had been tended, wild flowers spilled over the low stones, and birds nested among them, as if to say that remembrance, when kept gently, could become a cradle rather than a shackle. Gimli rode up beside him, silent for a time, then spoke in a voice thickened by dust and thought. "You look at this land like a father returning to his child after long absence, as though you are not certain whether it remembers you with love or bitterness." Aragorn did not answer at first. His gaze lingered on the fields, then rose to the white spires that climbed like fingers into the sky, their tips touched by light as if in benediction. At last he turned to his friend and said, "Because I wonder truly whether it was love I gave it when I left, or simply duty. And now that I return not as a warrior, nor even fully as a king, but as a man who has walked through the long halls of his own lineage and learned how little power can truly hold, I ask myself, am I enough? Can I offer something to this land that is not only law, not only strength, but something softer, something more enduring, can, and let it bloom into peace?" Gimli grunted, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "You speak as though the land demands poetry, but maybe what it needs is simply what you've become. A king who has learned to listen. A king who knows that power, untempered by silence, is a fire that devours. You've been tempered now, Aragorn, like Mithril folded in darkness, and that, my friend, is rare." Legal approached then, his horse barely making a sound on the road. He had been quiet most of the morning, as though he had slipped into the long breath of the trees that lined the fields. He dismounted and walked forward a few steps, his hand extended toward a white blossom growing by the roadside. He touched it lightly, then spoke, his voice like wind moving through the high branches of a wood that remembers the songs of stars. "We often think of kingship as a summit," he said, "a high point reached through trial from which one commands the world below. But perhaps it is not so. Perhaps it is not the peak, but the deepest root, the place where all things converge, where water gathers, where silence pools. You are not the highest point in the kingdom, Aragorn. You are its root, its anchor, its voice in the dark." Aragorn closed his eyes for a moment. In that silence, the breeze shifted, cool and clean, bearing the scent of stone warmed by sun and distant lilac, and something older still, something that smelled of hearths long cold, of letters never sent, of promises made beneath starlight and never forgotten. He opened his eyes again and found for the first time in many months that he was not afraid. When they passed through the gates of Minas Tirith, there were no trumpets, no calls from the towers, but the people came, not in lines, not in ranks, but in slow ripples drawn from markets and courtyards and alleyways until the streets were full of faces, some smiling, some solemn, all watching. And they did not cheer nor cry, but they placed their hands over their hearts and bowed, not low, not as to a distant figure of reverence, but as to a man they knew, a man who had left as a king and returned as something more enduring. Arwen stood at the highest terrace, where the wind moved freely and the stars began to whisper of evening. She watched him approach, not with urgency, but with calm, her face serene as water that has come to rest after a long storm. And when he reached her, he did not speak. He simply took her hand, and she took his, and they stood together beneath the sky that had watched them both, when she was immortal and far, and he was young and full of shadows. Now they were simply here together, and the silence around them was not emptiness, it was presence. Later in the high halls, Aragorn would kneel not before a throne, but before the map of his kingdom, sketched in old ink, frayed at the edges, full of places he now saw not as dominions, but as homes. He would place a single stone upon the north, not as a mark of conquest, but as a sign of return. And he would light a candle there, one of many, that would burn quietly without fanfare, simply bearing witness to all that had been learned. And so the reign of Aragorn truly began, not with the clash of armies or the blaze of banners, but with stillness, with understanding, with the gentle weight of roots stretching deep into the earth, and the promise that come war or winter, there would be a king who knew how to wait and how to listen. Years passed as quietly as the falling of leaves in a forgotten glade, and though time moved forward with the steady rhythm that no king, no matter how noble or wise, could command to halt, it moved differently within the walls of the White City, not slower, but more softly, as though each passing season were cradled rather than endured. The gardens of Minas had changed since the days of shadow. The air there now tasted of time and starlight, and the saplings planted by children in the first years of peace had grown into young trees, their branches climbing eagerly toward the sun. Within those gardens, in the soft golden dusk of late spring, Arwen often walked alone, barefoot, her long gown trailing like a breath across the dew-brushed grass, her thoughts blooming as silently as the moonflowers that opened in her wake. She did not wear a crown. She had never needed one. The people knew her not only as queen, but as presence, as the quiet balance to Alar's strength, as the memory of stars brought down into the house of men. Her beauty remained untouched by time, but it was no longer the untouched radiance of elven realms. It had deepened, ripened, matured into something more mortal, more grounded, more sorrowful, and more powerful for it. On one such evening, as the horizon blushed and the wind played softly in the boughs of the white tree, she paused before a small stone bench in the shadow of a tall elm, a tree Aragorn had planted himself long ago after returning from the north. He had said little at the time, only that he had found something worth remembering, and that the tree would remember it too. Now it towered above the gardens, and the children of the city called it the Memory Tree, though they did not know why. Arwen sat folding her hands in her lap and gazed at the western sky. The breeze touched her face like the hand of an old friend, and she closed her eyes for a moment, allowing memory to rise, not in pain, but in warmth. She could see him still, not in the fullness of his regal bearing, but in the small things, the way he furrowed his brow while reading maps, the rhythm of his breath beside her in silence. She saw him beneath trees, not thrones, in glades, not great halls. She had loved a man who became a king, But more, she had loved a king who chose to remain a man. When she opened her eyes again, the sky had darkened slightly. The first star had appeared, and as she watched it shimmer, she began to speak, not loudly, not as if addressing the heavens, but as though he were still beside her, as if the air itself had become him. "You asked me once," she whispered, "what it meant to give up the light of the Eldar. And I could not answer then. Not truly. I only knew that I loved you, that I chose you. But now, after all these years, I understand. It was not a surrender, it was a planting. I did not give up eternity. I buried it like a seed. And it grew into this life, into you, into the peace you shaped, into the sun we raised, into the stillness that now surrounds me. A pause and a breath, and then I will not leave these shores. I will not sail, for I am already across the sea. Not the sundering sea, but the sea between memory and presence, between then and now. I live where you live, and when I walk through these gardens, I am not alone. I carry you as you once carried your fathers." And so the song goes on. The wind stirred again, carrying the scent of late blossoms and the faintest memory of the north. Arwen rose, her face calm, her eyes lit by starlight, and walked once more into the folds of the garden, her steps sure, her silence not empty, but full, like the silence of a page that waits patiently for the next verse to be written. And behind her, beneath the elm, planted by a king who had learned how to listen, a single blossom fell and did not break.